It was a quiet Thursday morning when Sarah decided to pay an unexpected visit to her husband's office. She had always stayed away from his work life, but today felt different. There was something she needed to clarify, something that had been bugging her for weeks. She wasn't sure what she was looking for, but she felt this nagging urge to go. Upon entering the building, Sarah took the elevator to the upper floors where her husband's office was located. The polished marble floors and gleaming glass walls were unfamiliar yet imposing. As she made her way down the hallway, the company's secretary, a sharp-eyed woman named Rachel, stopped her. "Excuse me, can I help you?" Rachel asked, her voice clipped. Sarah was taken aback but tried to remain calm. "I'm here to see my husband." Rachel frowned, raising an eyebrow. "You can't just walk in here without an appointment. Do you have one?" "I don't need an appointment," Sarah replied, trying to sound confident. "I'm his wife." At this, Rachel stepped forward, blocking her path. "I'm sorry, but that's not how things work here. You'll need to leave." Before Sarah could respond, the office door swung open, and her husband, Robert, appeared. He noticed the tension immediately. "What's going on?" he asked, stepping toward them. Rachel immediately launched into her complaint. She tried to enter without permission, and when I asked for her appointment, she refused to give one. Sarah's heart raced as Robert turned his gaze from Rachel to her. He had always been polite but had a way of asserting authority when necessary. "Rachel," he said calmly, "just ask her name." Rachel hesitated for a moment before complying. "What's your name?" "Sarah," she answered, her voice steady. Robert raised an eyebrow. "Your full name?" "Sarah Whitefield," she replied, giving her name in the manner she always did, using her maiden name. "Wait," Robert said, a small frown crossing his face. "Your full name, with my surname?" Sarah's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't expected him to press. "Sarah Whitefield Hunt," she added, taking a deep breath. Rachel looked confused but said nothing. Robert stared at his wife, his eyes narrowing for a moment before he turned to Rachel. "With this designation, does she need approval to enter?" Rachel stammered, looking from Sarah to Robert, unsure of what to say next. "But I didn't know she was Mrs. Hunt." Robert's face tightened, and for a brief second, there was a flicker of something in his eyes, something Sarah couldn't quite place. "I think," he said slowly, "you'll find that my wife doesn't need an appointment. After all, this is her first time here. She's not a stranger." Rachel looked taken aback, but before she could say anything, Robert's tone changed. "I'll be speaking to HR about this, Rachel. A bit of professionalism is in order." Sarah stood still, stunned by the shift in his demeanor. As the secretary walked away, looking embarrassed, Robert turned back to Sarah. "Are you okay?" She nodded, though something was off. She hadn't expected Robert to get so serious, or to imply something deeper, like she wasn't welcome to visit her own husband's office. A chill ran down her spine as she realized that Robert's life at work seemed to be more guarded than she had imagined. There was a side of him she had never truly known. "Let's talk," he said, motioning toward his office. As she followed him, the unsettling feeling lingered. The secrets hidden behind his professional mask were deeper than she had ever suspected. What exactly was he protecting, and from whom? The door to Robert's office clicked shut behind them, the soft hum of the air conditioning the only sound between them. Sarah stood by the window, staring out at the bustling city below. Her thoughts swirled, and an unease crept in. She couldn't shake the strange sensation that something was off. Robert had always been calm, collected, and charming, but today, there was something in his eyes, something unreadable. "Sit," Robert said softly, motioning to one of the leather chairs opposite his desk. He didn't sit immediately but walked to the window, his back to her as he gazed out, his hands clasped behind him. Sarah hesitated but sat down. She placed her purse on the floor and clasped her hands in her lap. Her nerves were getting the best of her, but she fought to stay composed. "Robert," she began, trying to sound casual but failing, "why didn't you tell me that things here were so formal?" Robert's eyes flickered toward her, but he didn't turn around. "I didn't think you'd need to know," he said, his voice even, almost detached. "It's just business." "Business," Sarah repeated, feeling a cold knot form in her stomach. But, Robert, I'm your wife. I should be able to come to your office whenever I want. Why did she treat me like that? She couldn't keep the frustration from her voice. Robert finally turned around, his expression unreadable. I don't expect you to understand, he said quietly, but there was a sharpness to his words. This place, it's not just a job to me. It's more than that. The words hung in the air like a heavy weight. Sarah stood up, pacing the room now. More than what, Robert? More than me? More than us? I didn't say that, he replied, his voice tight. He stepped forward, closing the distance between them, his eyes intense. But there are things you don't understand about my work. It's complicated. Complicated? Sarah laughed, though it was bitter. We've been married for almost 2 years now, and I've never felt like you've let me in. It's like I'm always on the outside of your life. Robert looked at her, his expression shifting. There was something almost apologetic in his eyes, but then it disappeared as quickly as it had come. I never wanted that. But some things are better left alone. For your own good. Sarah's heart raced. What does that even mean, Robert? What's going on here? Who are you really? For a moment there was silence. Robert ran a hand through his hair, his gaze dropping to the floor. When he spoke again, his voice was quieter, more resigned. There's a lot about me that you don't know. My work, it's not just about numbers and meetings. I've had to make certain alliances, certain sacrifices. Sarah felt a chill spread through her. Sacrifices? Alliances? Robert, what are you saying? Before Robert could respond, a knock on the door interrupted them. Sarah's heart leapt into her throat as the door creaked open, revealing Rachel standing in the doorway. She had a look of hesitation on her face, as if she didn't want to intrude but wasn't sure what else to do. Mr. Hunt, she said, addressing Robert, there's a call for you online too. It's urgent. Robert didn't even glance at her. I'll be there in a minute, he said curtly. Rachel hesitated, then glanced at Sarah before stepping back, closing the door softly behind her. The air felt thick with tension after she left. Who was that? Sarah asked, her voice trembling with frustration and confusion. What's going on, Robert? Why do you keep pushing me away? Robert walked over to the desk, his movement slow, as if he was weighing his words carefully. I never wanted to keep you in the dark, Sarah, he began, but his voice was laced with a strange finality. But sometimes, people from my past come knocking. They bring problems that I can't ignore. If you knew everything, you'd be in danger. Sarah froze. The word danger echoed in her mind, reverberating with the intensity of what it meant. Danger? What kind of danger? Robert? He turned to face her fully, his expression now hard, unyielding. The kind you can't understand. I thought I could keep you away from this life. But now, I'm not so sure. Her heart pounded in her chest as a flood of emotions overwhelmed her. Anger, fear, confusion. She didn't know where to begin. I've been living with you for 2 years, Robert. 2 years, and now you tell me there's something you've been hiding from me? The words were out before she could stop them, and she immediately regretted them. Robert's face hardened, his jaw tightening. You have to trust me, he said, his voice a low growl. I've been protecting you all this time. From people who would use you against me, from people who wouldn't hesitate to destroy everything if it meant getting what they want. You don't know who you're dealing with. Sarah stumbled back, her mind racing. She had no idea what he was talking about, but the weight of his words felt suffocating. Who are they, Robert? Who's out there, and why would they come after me? He exhaled sharply, frustration evident in his posture. I can't tell you everything right now. But I will. You need to trust me for a little longer. There's a bigger picture here. The office suddenly felt claustrophobic, the walls closing in around her. Robert, she whispered, unsure of what to believe anymore. I don't know if I can. He stepped toward her, reaching out as if to touch her, but he stopped just short. His gaze softened, a flicker of guilt crossing his features. I never wanted to hurt you. I just wanted to keep you safe. Safe? The word felt hollow in her ears, a cruel echo. Safe from what? The days that followed were filled with more questions than answers. Sarah couldn't get the conversation out of her head. Robert had always been her rock, the man she trusted more than anyone. But now, everything she thought she knew about him was being called into question. Every time she tried to talk to him, he brushed her off with vague explanations or half-truths. He'd become distant, lost in his work, and whenever she tried to bring up the topic of his dangerous past, he would change the subject or tell her it wasn't the right time. But Sarah was no fool. She knew something was wrong, and she wasn't going to let it slide. One afternoon, while Robert was in a meeting, Sarah decided to do something bold. She ventured into his office and started going through his desk. She found a locked drawer and, after a few attempts, managed to open it. Inside, there were files, thick, confidential-looking documents. And one of them caught her eye. It was a photo of Robert with a group of men she didn't recognize. They were standing in front of a private jet, smiling as if they were on top of the world. But there was something about the way they stood, together, yet apart, that sent a chill down Sarah's spine. She flipped through the pages, scanning the information. Names, locations, dates, none of it made sense. But one name jumped out at her. Lucas Grant. The name meant nothing to Sarah, but something about it felt important. As if it were the key to understanding everything that had been hidden from her. She quickly gathered the documents and shoved them into her purse. She didn't know who Lucas Grant was, but she was going to find out. Sarah couldn't shake the gnawing feeling that something bigger was at play. The name Lucas Grant had haunted her every thought since she found it in the file. She hadn't known why, but it felt like a key to something deep, something hidden. For the first time in years, she felt like she was standing on the edge of a precipice, peering into a dark abyss, unsure of what might lurk beneath. The night after she found the file, Sarah couldn't sleep. She kept replaying Robert's words in her head, people from my past, and the way he had seemed so determined to protect her from whatever was coming. She couldn't let it go. She couldn't keep pretending everything was fine when her husband was hiding something so serious. By morning, she had made a decision. She would find out who Lucas Grant was, no matter the cost. She started her search online, hoping to uncover anything she could about this mysterious figure. It didn't take long before she stumbled upon an article buried deep in the archives of a news site. The headline sent a shiver down her spine. Lucas Grant, business tycoon with ties to international crime syndicates. The article detailed Lucas Grant's rise to power, his connections to some of the most dangerous people in the world, and his involvement in various illegal activities, including money laundering and arms trading. But what caught Sarah's attention the most was a single line at the end of the article. It is rumored that Grant's connections extend to the highest echelons of business and politics, including the CEO of Hunt Industries, Robert Hunt. Her heart nearly stopped. Robert? How could he be connected to someone like Lucas Grant? This was more than just bad business. It was a dangerous world she never knew existed. Without thinking, Sarah grabbed her coat and purse and rushed to Robert's office. She needed answers, and she needed them now. When she arrived at Hunt Industries, Sarah didn't waste any time. She bypassed the secretary with a sharp nod and went straight to Robert's office. The door was slightly ajar, and she could see him sitting at his desk, his back turned as he spoke into the phone. His voice was low, but Sarah caught the sharpness in his words. "I don't care what it takes, get it done." Robert's voice was cold, a side of him she'd never heard before. "If anyone gets in our way, eliminate them." The words hit Sarah like a slap to the face. She stood frozen in the doorway, the realization dawning on her like a tidal wave. Robert wasn't just a businessman. He was involved in something far darker than she had ever imagined. Without thinking, she pushed the door open fully, her voice shaking with anger and betrayal. "Robert," she cried, making him turn quickly. His face was unreadable, but she saw the tension in his jaw as he caught sight of her. "Sarah, what are you doing here?" His tone was immediately defensive, his eyes darting to the phone as if he wanted to end the conversation as quickly as possible. "Who is Lucas Grant?" she demanded, her voice trembling with a mix of fear and rage. "Why is your name tied to him in those files? What is going on, Robert?" His face darkened, and for the first time, Sarah saw a flicker of fear in his eyes, a fear she had never seen before. He stood up slowly, his body tense as if he was preparing for a fight. "I told you, Sarah. I've been trying to protect you." "Protect me from what?" she spat. "From the truth? What have you been hiding from me? Who are you really?" Robert stepped forward, his voice low and threatening. "You don't understand, Sarah. I never wanted you involved in this. You don't know the people we're dealing with. If you dig too deep, they'll come after you. They'll come after everything you love. Then tell me the truth." Sarah cried, her voice breaking. "Tell me what I'm up against." For a moment, Robert was silent, his gaze hardening. His eyes flicked to the phone, and he walked over, ending the call abruptly. When he turned back to her, his face was serious, his tone softer, almost pleading. "I never wanted this life for you," he said quietly. "But Lucas Grant, he's dangerous. I've been trying to pull away, trying to protect the company and you from him, but it's not that simple. I owe him. I owe him a lot more than just business deals. Our families have been tied together for years, and there's no easy way out of this." Sarah felt her knees weaken. "Owe him? What does that mean, Robert? Why didn't you tell me?" Robert closed his eyes for a moment, as if he were fighting with himself. "There's no way out of this. Once you're in for life. I did some things in the past that I'm not proud of, things I wish I could undo. But I can't. And now you're tangled up in it, too. Because of me. Because of my mistakes." Sarah's world was shattering. She had always known Robert to be a good man, someone with integrity and a moral compass, even if he sometimes kept his work life a little too separate from their home life. But this was something entirely different. "How much more is there, Robert?" she whispered, her voice hoarse with emotion. "How deep does this go?" He hesitated for a moment, before speaking with grim finality. "Deep enough that I can't protect you from it forever." As the days passed, Sarah found herself caught between a whirlwind of emotions: anger, betrayal, fear, and the crushing weight of the secrets Robert had kept from her. But there was one thing she knew for sure: she couldn't stay in the dark any longer. If she was truly going to be a part of Robert's world, she needed to understand it, all of it. Determined to uncover the full extent of Robert's involvement with Lucas Grant, Sarah spent the next few days digging through every file she could find. She contacted old colleagues, traced back phone calls, and found old associates who might know something about Lucas and Robert's past dealings. One night, she came across a shocking discovery. It wasn't just Robert who owed Lucas Grant. Their entire company was in debt to him. A series of secret business transactions, hidden in plain sight within the company's financial records, pointed directly to illegal activities funded by Lucas Grant's empire. The Hunt family wasn't just in business with criminals, they were financially entangled in a massive, international syndicate. The reality of it hit Sarah hard. Robert hadn't just been protecting her from people who wanted to harm her, he had been keeping her in the dark to shield her from the truth about their lives. They were trapped, both in love and in debt, caught between the demands of a dangerous world and the consequences of Robert's choices. But as Sarah sat in front of the computer screen, piecing together the puzzle of Robert's past, one thing became clear. She could either turn her back on him and walk away, or she could step into this world, by his side, and fight for everything they had built together. The choice was hers. Sarah couldn't stop pacing. The room felt smaller and smaller with every passing second, the weight of the choices pressing on her chest like a vice. She had uncovered so much in the past few days, too much to ignore, too much to let go. And yet, despite everything she had learned, her heart ached for Robert. She couldn't deny the love she still felt for him, even though it seemed like the world he had been hiding from her was too much to bear. She sat at the edge of the bed, her hands trembling as she stared at the financial records spread out before her. The names, the numbers, the proof. It was all there, staring her in the face. She had always known Robert was a man of power, of influence, but she had never imagined it would come at such a cost. And now, she had to decide what to do with the knowledge she had uncovered. Was she willing to walk away from her life with him? To walk away from everything they had built together? Or was there another way? The answer wasn't as clear-cut as she wished it could be. Robert hadn't come home yet. He had been staying at the office late, dealing with some business matters, as he put it. Sarah knew better now. She knew those matters weren't just board meetings and presentations. They were the invisible ties that bound Robert to people like Lucas Grant. Dangerous people. But Sarah couldn't stay away any longer. She needed to talk to him. She needed to understand what he was willing to do to protect her and what he was willing to sacrifice. As if on cue, the door to their apartment clicked open. Robert stepped inside, his face tired but guarded. The moment he saw her sitting on the bed, he froze. "Sarah," he said, his voice low. "You're still up?" She nodded, her heart pounding in her chest. "We need to talk." Robert closed the door behind him, locking it with a soft click. His eyes were full of concern, but there was an edge to them now. He knew this conversation was coming. He took a seat next to her, but not too close. He had learned to keep his distance when things were tense. "What's on your mind?" "Everything," Sarah said, her voice shaking slightly. She took a deep breath and then let it out slowly. "Robert, I found the files. The truth about Lucas Grant. The money, the transactions. I know everything." For a moment, Robert didn't say anything. His expression hardened, and he ran a hand through his hair, looking anywhere but at her. "Sarah," his voice faltered. "I didn't want you to find out like this. I tried to protect you." "Protect me?" Sarah repeated, the anger in her voice rising now. "From the truth? From the life we're living? Robert, I don't know who you are anymore." His face softened for a moment, a flicker of regret in his eyes. "I never wanted you to be part of this world. I never wanted to drag you into it. But the deeper I got, the harder it became to get out." She met his gaze, her own eyes searching his for the truth. "So, what now? What do we do now, Robert?" He looked away again, a brief but intense silence stretching between them. "I don't know," he admitted quietly. "But I'm not letting you go, Sarah. Not after everything we've built together." She blinked in disbelief. "You can't just protect me from everything, Robert. I'm not some fragile thing you can hide away. You can't make decisions for me." He stood up, pacing the room. "You don't understand, Sarah. This isn't just about me. This isn't about protecting you. It's about keeping everyone safe. Lucas doesn't just play games, he plays for keeps. And if he finds out that you know anything, if he even suspects you're involved in this, it could be the end of everything. For both of us." Sarah's mind was racing. She couldn't stand the thought of losing him, but she also couldn't stand the idea of living in the dark, of staying silent while Robert kept burying the truth deeper and deeper. She was a part of this life now, whether she liked it or not. The world Robert had kept hidden was her world, too. "I want to help," she said, standing up now, her voice strong. "I want to be in this with you. If we're going to fight this, we have to do it together. You can't do it alone anymore." Robert stopped pacing and turned to face her. His eyes searched hers, and for the first time in a long while, she saw a glimmer of something other than caution, something that looked like hope. "You'd really do this?" he asked softly, as though he couldn't believe she was serious. "I don't want to lose you," Sarah said, her voice steady. "And I don't want to be left behind, wondering what could have been. Whatever comes next, we face it together. But we face it honestly." Robert took a deep breath, his face softening. "You're right," he said quietly. "I've kept so much from you, and I should have told you sooner. You deserve the truth." For the first time in what felt like forever, they were on the same page. No more lies. No more hiding. They were standing at the edge of something huge, something dangerous. But if they were going to make it through, they would have to face it head-on, together. The next few days were a whirlwind. Robert introduced Sarah to some of his colleagues in the business world who had been part of the deal with Lucas Grant. People who were still very much involved with the syndicate but had stayed in the shadows, operating from the outside to avoid attracting attention. One of the first people she met was Ethan, a sharp, well-dressed man with cold eyes who ran some of Robert's more covert operations. He was polite enough but had a certain wariness in his gaze when he first laid eyes on Sarah. It didn't take long for her to realize that no one in Robert's world trusted easily. And even less so, a woman who had suddenly thrust herself into a world that had always been kept behind closed doors. Ethan was the first to make Sarah realize just how far this web of deception stretched. "It's not just money laundering, Mrs. Hunt," he told her one afternoon. "We're dealing with a network of people who don't hesitate to make things disappear. If you're going to be part of this, you need to understand that everything we do here has consequences. And not just for us." Sarah felt her pulse quicken, the enormity of the situation crashing down on her. "What exactly do you mean by disappear?" she asked, her voice steady but trembling with the fear she was trying to hide. Ethan didn't flinch. "I mean people who get in our way. People who don't know when to stop digging." Sarah swallowed hard, her mind reeling. She had asked for this. She had chosen to stand by Robert's side. But the reality of it hit her in a way she hadn't prepared for. There was no going back now. No more running. If she was going to stay in this world, she would have to live by its rules. And that meant playing a game far more dangerous than she had ever imagined. Days turned into weeks, and Sarah found herself more deeply entrenched in Robert's world than she had ever imagined. She was meeting people she had never expected to encounter: corrupt businessmen, powerful allies, and, inevitably, enemies lurking in the shadows. With each step, she realized that she had entered a world where loyalty was fragile and trust was a commodity that could be bought and sold. Despite everything, Sarah refused to back down. She had made a promise to Robert, to herself, and now she was living in the consequences of that choice. But as much as she tried to convince herself that she could handle the pressure, that she was strong enough to face whatever came next, the weight was growing unbearable. Robert seemed to be changing too. The man who had once been her loving husband, always calm and controlled, now seemed a shadow of his former self. His nights were spent at the office, deep in negotiations with people Sarah had grown to fear. He was more distant, more secretive, and his protective instincts, once a comforting presence, now felt like a prison. She knew he was trying to shield her, but the harder he tried, the more she felt the walls closing in. One night, after another long day of tense meetings and barely spoken words, Sarah found herself standing in the living room of their apartment, staring out at the city below. It was the same city they had once dreamed of conquering together, but now it felt like a labyrinth, one she didn't know how to escape. Robert entered quietly behind her, his footsteps heavy with the weight of 100 unspoken words. When she turned to face him, she saw the familiar guilt in his eyes. It was as if he knew she was beginning to crack under the pressure, but he didn't know how to stop it. "Sarah," he said softly, his voice low. "We need to talk." She turned back toward the window, her eyes flicking over the dark skyline. "What's left to talk about, Robert?" she asked, her voice almost breaking. "We're in too deep now. We've already made our choice, haven't we?" He moved closer, his presence filling the room, but there was an unfamiliar distance between them now. "I'm trying to protect you," he said, the words like a plea. "I'm trying to fix this." "I swear I am." Sarah felt a sharp, painful twist in her chest. "From what, Robert? You're trying to fix something that can't be fixed. We're already in this, and I don't know how much longer I can pretend I'm okay with it. I didn't sign up for this life of secrets, of lies, of danger." Robert's face faltered, the man she knew slipping away, replaced by someone more hardened, someone who had lost too much to ever go back. "I never wanted any of this for you. I wanted you to have a normal life. A life where you didn't have to look over your shoulder every day. I wanted that for us, for you. But there's no going back now. You are a part of this world. There's no way out anymore, Sarah." The finality in his words hung in the air like a heavy cloud, and Sarah felt a tear slip down her cheek, though she quickly wiped it away. "I don't want to live like this anymore, Robert," she whispered, a deep ache in her voice. "I don't want to live in fear, always waiting for the next shoe to drop. I need to know if you even want a way out." Robert was silent, his eyes searching hers, trying to find an answer to a question that neither of them had the courage to ask. Finally, he shook his head. "I wish there was a way out, Sarah. But if we leave this world behind, it won't let us go. Lucas Grant will never let us go." Her heart sank. "Then what's the point of all of this?" What are we even fighting for? The silence between them felt like a chasm, growing wider by the second. But then, Robert took a step back, his face resigned. Maybe it's time we stop fighting. Maybe we've already lost. The decision came suddenly, a split-second moment of clarity amidst the chaos. It was late one night when Lucas Grant's men finally made their move. They came for Robert, just like Sarah had feared. A black van pulled up outside their building, and before Sarah knew what was happening, masked men were storming into their apartment. The confrontation was fast and brutal. Robert fought back with all the skill he had accumulated over the years, but it was clear that he wasn't going to win. This was the moment he had been dreading, the moment when his past caught up with him. And it came with a price. Sarah screamed as she saw one of the men pull a gun on Robert, the metal glinting under the dim lights. Before she could react, Robert shoved her toward the door, yelling at her to run. "Sarah, go," he ordered, desperation in his voice. But Sarah didn't move. She couldn't. In that instant, everything she had feared, everything she had known to be true, hit her like a ton of bricks. She wasn't just a bystander in this world. She was part of it whether she liked it or not. She couldn't hide. She couldn't run. With a final, resigned look, Robert whispered, "I'm sorry." And then the gunshot rang out. The world fell silent. Sarah's heart stopped. She couldn't breathe. Her Robert, was gone. Everything after that was a blur. She remembered the men leaving, the sound of the door slamming shut, and then her body moving on autopilot as she stumbled to Robert's side. He was still alive, barely, his blood staining the floor as he struggled for breath. "Robert, no," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Please don't leave me. Please." But he only managed a weak smile, his fingers brushing her cheek. "I tried," he rasped. "I tried to protect you, but there's no escape." And with that, he was gone. In the weeks that followed, the world Sarah had known was turned upside down. The truth about Robert's dealings with Lucas Grant was exposed in the press, and his empire crumbled. The company he had spent his life building was gone, and with it, any chance of redemption. Sarah was left to pick up the pieces of her shattered life. She had lost everything: her husband, her peace, and the future she had once believed in. But she was stronger now. She had faced the darkness, and while it had consumed the man she loved, it would not consume her. In the end, Sarah made a choice. She would walk away from the past and rebuild her life, free from the chains of the world Robert had once dragged her into. But she knew that the scars of that world would never fade. Some wounds were too deep to heal. And as she moved forward, she vowed never to forget Robert, his love, his mistakes, and the price they had paid for a life they could never reclaim. Thanks for watching. For more episodes, please subscribe Eververse Novel.